The phone call came at 6:47 a.m. on a Wednesday morning. I was getting ready for work when my cell phone rang with a number I recognized, Meadowbrook Care Facility, where my mother had lived for the past 18 months. "Is this Olivia Campbell?" a woman's voice asked, tight with barely concealed panic. "Yes, this is Olivia. Is my mother okay?" "This is Brenda from the nursing staff. We need you to come in immediately. There's been a development with your mother's health." My stomach dropped. Mom was only 52 years old, but she'd been profoundly deaf since birth and had developed early-onset dementia 2 years ago. The combination made caring for her at home impossible, which was why she lived at Meadowbrook. "What kind of development?" I demanded. "Is she hurt? Sick?" "It's better if we discuss this in person. How soon can you get here?" 20 minutes later, I walked into Meadowbrook's administrative office to find Brenda, the facility director, Stanley Morrison. "Wait, I can't use Morrison. Let me restart." 20 minutes later, I walked into Meadowbrook's administrative office to find Brenda, the facility director, Stanley Crawford, and a doctor I'd never seen before, all wearing identical expressions of discomfort. "Miss Campbell," Stanley began, his professional smile not reaching his eyes. "Please, sit down. We have some unexpected news about your mother." I sat, gripping my purse tightly. "What's wrong with her?" The unfamiliar doctor cleared his throat. "I'm Dr. Wallace. I conducted an examination of your mother this morning after she reported feeling unwell. Miss Campbell, your mother is approximately 8 weeks pregnant." The words didn't make sense at first. I heard them, but my brain couldn't process them into anything coherent. "That's impossible," I said finally. "My mother lives here. She's under your care 24 hours a day. How could she possibly be pregnant?" Stanley leaned forward, his expression shifting to something almost sympathetic. "We understand this is shocking news. We're equally surprised. However, we need to discuss the timeline. Your mother was on a 2-week home visit with your family approximately 10 weeks ago, correct?" I stared at him. "Yes, we took her to my sister's house for a family reunion. What does that have to do with anything?" "Well," Stanley said carefully, "the timeline would suggest that the pregnancy occurred during that 2-week period when she was in your care, not ours." The implication hit me like a slap. "You're suggesting my mother got pregnant while visiting my family? That's insane. She was with us the entire time. With me, my sister, my brother-in-law, my nephews. There's no way." "We're not making accusations," Stanley interrupted smoothly. "We're simply establishing facts. Your mother left here on June 15th and returned on June 29th. Dr. Wallace estimates she's 8 weeks pregnant, which puts conception right in that window." "My mother has severe dementia," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "She can barely remember her own name." "Who would?" I couldn't even finish the sentence. The thought was too horrible. "Exactly," Stanley said. "Which is why we need to investigate what happened during her home visit. Did she have any unsupervised time? Any contact with people outside your immediate family?" I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. "I want to see my mother. Now." "Of course," Stanley said, rising smoothly. "But first, we need to discuss next steps. We're legally required to report this situation to Adult Protective Services. They'll likely want to question you and your family members about her care during those 2 weeks." "You think someone in my family hurt my mother?" The accusation was clear, even though he hadn't said it directly. "We're not making assumptions," Dr. Wallace interjected. "But pregnancy in a vulnerable adult requires investigation. We need to determine how this happened to ensure your mother's safety going forward." They led me to Mom's room. She was sitting up in bed, looking confused and frightened. When she saw me, her face brightened with recognition, one of her good moments. I approached her bedside and took her hand, signing slowly. "Mom, are you okay? Do you feel sick?" She signed back clumsily, her dementia making even her native sign language difficult. "Confused. Doctors don't understand." "I know, Mom. I'm here now. I'll figure this out." Stanley stood in the doorway watching us. "Miss Campbell will need detailed information about everyone who had contact with your mother during her home visit. Names, relationships, times, dates." "My mother didn't get pregnant at my sister's house," I said firmly, still holding Mom's hand. "She was never alone. Not for a single minute." "Then we have a problem," Stanley replied. "Because she's definitely pregnant, and it happened somewhere." After leaving Mom's room, I sat in my car in the parking lot, trying to process everything. 8 weeks pregnant. The timeline would put conception around mid to late June. Mom had been at my sister Rachel's house from June 15th to June 29th. But Stanley was wrong about one thing. Mom hadn't been with us the entire time. I'd dropped her off at Meadowbrook on June 29th, around 3 p.m. I'd stayed for about an hour to help her settle back in, then left for a work appointment. That meant Mom had been back at Meadowbrook for over a week before the 8-week mark. I pulled out my phone and called my sister. "Rachel, it's Olivia. Something's happened with Mom. Something terrible." I explained the pregnancy, Stanley's accusations, the timeline. Rachel was silent for a long moment. "That's impossible," she said finally. "Mom was with us every single day. She slept in the guest room next to our bedroom. She was never alone with anyone. The only male in the house was Paul, and he barely interacted with her because she makes him uncomfortable." "I know, but Meadowbrook is trying to blame it on her home visit. They're going to report us to Adult Protective Services." "Let them," Rachel said fiercely. "We have nothing to hide." "But Olivia, if it didn't happen here, then it happened at that facility, under their care. And they're trying to cover it up by pointing fingers at us." She was right. Of course she was right. "I'm going to request Mom's medical records," I said. "Every single document from the past 3 months. And I want the visitor logs and security camera footage." I marched back into Meadowbrook and found Stanley in his office. "I need copies of all my mother's medical records, visitor logs, and security footage for the past 3 months. Stanley's friendly demeanor evaporated. "That's not how this works. We can't just hand over security footage." "You're accusing my family of allowing my vulnerable mother to be assaulted," I interrupted. "I have the right to defend against those accusations. I want documentation of everyone who had access to my mother while she was supposedly under your supervision." "We haven't made any formal accusations," Stanley said carefully. "We're simply investigating all possibilities." "Then let me investigate too. Unless you have something to hide?" Stanley's jaw tightened. "I'll have our legal team review your request. We take resident privacy very seriously. My mother's privacy was violated when someone got her pregnant. I want to know who had access to her, when, and under what circumstances. If you refuse to provide that information, I'll get a lawyer and a court order." "There's no need for threats, Miss Campbell. We want to get to the truth as much as you do." "Do you?" I challenged. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're more interested in blaming my family than examining what happened in your facility." I left before Stanley could respond, my hands shaking with anger and fear. Mom was pregnant. Someone had assaulted her. And Meadowbrook was trying to cover it up by claiming it happened during her home visit. But I had something Stanley didn't know about. Something that would prove exactly where I'd been and what I'd been doing during the timeline he was so carefully constructing. That evening, I met with my lawyer, Harold Fisher. I'd used him for estate planning after Dad died, and I trusted him to handle the situation with the seriousness it deserved. "Pregnancy resulting from assault of a vulnerable adult," Harold said grimly, reviewing the notes I'd provided. "This is a criminal matter. The facility is trying to deflect responsibility by suggesting it happened during her home visit." "Exactly. But Harold, I can prove it didn't happen at Rachel's house. I can prove exactly where Mom was and who had access to her during the critical time frame." "How?" I pulled out my phone. "I set up a tablet in Mom's room at Rachel's house so we could monitor her at night. She sometimes wanders when she's confused. The tablet has a motion-activated camera that records automatically and saves everything to the cloud." Harold leaned forward. "You have video evidence of your mother's entire stay at your sister's house?" "Every night, yes. During the day, she was with us constantly. But the nights, those are all recorded. If Stanley wants to claim something happened during her home visit, I can prove it didn't." "That's excellent. But if it didn't happen during the home visit, then it happened at Meadowbrook, and they're going to fight very hard to avoid that conclusion. What should I do?" "First, formally request all records and footage like you already did. When they refuse or delay, I'll file a motion to compel discovery. Second, we report this to the police ourselves. Don't wait for Adult Protective Services. This is sexual assault of a vulnerable person. It's a crime. The next day, I filed a police report. Detective Carmichael, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude, took my statement. Your mother is deaf and has dementia, and she's 8 weeks pregnant, she repeated, taking notes. The facility is claiming it happened during a home visit, but you have evidence to the contrary? Video evidence. She was at my sister's house for 2 weeks in June. I have recordings from every night showing she was in her room, alone, undisturbed. And during the days, she was constantly supervised by family members. Can I see this footage? I pulled up the cloud storage on my phone and showed her several nights' worth of recordings. Mom sleeping peacefully, occasionally getting up to use the bathroom, then returning to bed, always alone. This is good, Detective Carmichael said. Very good. It establishes that your family provided appropriate care and supervision. Now I need to investigate what happened at the facility. Meadowbrook is stonewalling me on records and footage, I told her. They won't stonewall the police. I'll get a warrant for their security footage, staff schedules, visitor logs, everything. If your mother was assaulted in that facility, we'll find out who did it. 2 days later, Detective Carmichael called with an update. Meadowbrook is claiming their security cameras in the resident wing have been malfunctioning for the past 3 months. Convenient timing. That's a lie, I said immediately. When I toured the facility before placing Mom there, they specifically advertised their comprehensive security system as a selling point. I thought you'd say that. Do you have any documentation of those claims? I pulled up the emails from 18 months ago when I'd been researching facilities for Mom. There it was, Meadowbrook's marketing materials, explicitly stating 24/7 security monitoring in all resident areas with state-of-the-art camera systems for resident safety and family peace of mind. I forwarded everything to Detective Carmichael, who called back within an hour. This is evidence of false advertising at minimum, possibly obstruction of justice if they deliberately disabled cameras to hide wrongdoing. I'm escalating this investigation. We'll be interviewing all staff members who had access to your mother. Over the next week, I visited Mom daily. She seemed unaware of the investigations swirling around her. Her dementia meant she couldn't tell us what had happened or who had hurt her. She couldn't even understand that she was pregnant. The guilt ate at me. I'd placed her in Meadowbrook because I couldn't provide the specialized care she needed. I'd trusted them to keep her safe. And someone there had violated that trust in the worst possible way. Rachel called me every evening, asking for updates. Paul wants to go down to that facility and confront Stanley directly. I'm barely keeping him from doing something that would get him arrested. Tell Paul to stay calm. We're building a case. The truth will come out. It better come out soon. Every day that monster is still working there, other vulnerable people are at risk. She was right. If a staff member at Meadowbrook had assaulted Mom, they could assault other residents. The urgency wasn't just about justice for Mom. It was about protecting others. 2 weeks into the investigation, Detective Carmichael requested a meeting at the police station. I brought Harold with me. We've interviewed every staff member who had regular contact with your mother, Detective Carmichael began. 3 male nurses, 2 male orderlies, 1 male maintenance worker, and the facility director, Stanley Crawford himself. And, I prompted, all of them claim they never had inappropriate contact with your mother. Several have alibis for their shifts during the suspected conception window. But there's one person who stands out, an orderly named Blake Sutton. He worked the night shift exclusively during June and July. He had unrestricted access to resident rooms. Did he admit anything? In fact, he was overly cooperative, volunteered for a DNA test immediately, seemed eager to prove his innocence. That kind of behavior can go either way. Either he's genuinely innocent and wants to clear his name, or he's smart enough to know that appearing cooperative makes him look innocent. What about the security cameras? Harold asked. Did you determine why they weren't working? Detective Carmichael's expression darkened. That's where things get interesting. The cameras weren't malfunctioning. They were deliberately turned off on specific dates. June 17th, June 23rd, July 1st, July 8th, July 15th. Always the night shift. Always when Blake Sutton was working. My blood ran cold. So he was turning off the cameras before assaulting residents? That's our working theory. But here's the problem. The camera system requires administrator-level access to disable. Blake is an orderly. He wouldn't have that access. Who does? Harold asked. 3 people. The facility director, the head nurse, and the IT contractor who maintains the system. Stanley Crawford has administrator access, I said slowly. He could have disabled the cameras. Yes. Which means either Stanley is the perpetrator or he's covering for whoever is. We've requested his DNA as well. He refused and lawyered up immediately. Doesn't that make him look guilty? I asked. It makes him look like he has something to hide. Detective Carmichael corrected. Whether that something is assault or just general liability for the facility, we don't know yet. But we can compel DNA testing with a court order, which we're pursuing. Harold made notes on his legal pad. What about the other staff members? Any concerning patterns? The night nurse who worked Blake's shifts, a woman named Paula York, gave a statement that raised red flags. She said Blake often volunteered to check on residents alone, claiming he was giving her a break. She thought he was being helpful. In retrospect, she realizes he was creating opportunities to be alone with vulnerable patients. I felt sick. How many other residents could he have assaulted? We're in the process of examining all female residents who had contact with Blake during his employment. Unfortunately, many have dementia like your mother and can't provide reliable testimony about what happened to them. When will we have DNA results? Harold asked. The lab is expediting. We should have preliminary results in a week. If Blake is the father, we'll have grounds for arrest. If he's not, we keep investigating. After leaving the police station, I drove straight to Meadowbrook. I found Stanley in his office and didn't bother knocking before entering. My mother was assaulted in your facility, I said without preamble. You disabled the security cameras to hide it, and now you're trying to blame my family. Stanley's face flushed red. Those are serious accusations, Miss Campbell. I suggest you be very careful about making defamatory statements. I suggest you be very careful about obstructing a police investigation. Detective Carmichael is getting court orders for everything. DNA tests, employment records, access logs. The truth is coming out whether you cooperate or not. I've cooperated fully with law enforcement, Stanley said stiffly. We're taking this matter seriously. If someone on my staff hurt your mother, I want them held accountable just as much as you do. Then why did you immediately try to blame it on her home visit? Why claim the cameras were malfunctioning when they were deliberately disabled? Stanley's expression shifted slightly. I don't know what you're talking about. The security system you advertised as comprehensive and reliable, the one that mysteriously stopped working during the exact time frame when my mother was assaulted? Detective Carmichael has proof it was intentionally disabled. Systems malfunction, Stanley said, but his voice lacked conviction. Not on administrator-controlled schedules. Not only during night shifts. Not with the pattern the police have documented. Stanley stood abruptly. This conversation is over. If you have further concerns, address them through your attorney or law enforcement. Don't come into my office making wild accusations. I left, but not before noticing something on Stanley's desk, a folder labeled Legal Campbell Case. He was building a defense, preparing for the lawsuit he knew was coming. Good. Let him prepare. I had evidence he couldn't refute. The DNA results came back 11 days after testing. Detective Carmichael called me at 7 a.m. on a Friday. Blake Sutton is not the father. I sat down heavily. Then who? We're testing the other male staff members, but I need you to prepare for the possibility that we might not find a match. If your mother had contact with anyone else, visitors, contractors, anyone, we need to know. I've given you everything. Every detail about her home visit, every person she encountered. The only other people who had access to her were Meadowbrook's staff. What about the IT contractor who maintains the security system? He would have had administrator access to disable cameras. Have you tested him? He's refusing to cooperate, claims he hasn't been on site in months. We're getting a court order for his DNA and employment records. After hanging up, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something. Blake Sutton had the opportunity and the pattern of isolating residents. But he wasn't the father. So who was? I called Harold. The DNA ruled out Blake Sutton. The detective thinks maybe it was the IT contractor or someone we haven't considered. But Harold, what if it was Stanley himself? Did they test him yet? He refused initially. They're getting a court order. Smart money says Stanley is involved somehow. Whether as the perpetrator or as someone covering up for the actual perpetrator, he's dirty. No honest facility director would have reacted the way he did. That afternoon, I received a certified letter from Meadowbrook's attorneys. They were offering a settlement, $50,000 in exchange for me signing a non-disclosure agreement and removing Mom from the facility with no further legal action. I brought the settlement offer to Harold, who read it with growing disgust. This is hush money. They're trying to make this go away before the full truth comes out. Don't sign anything. I wasn't planning to. But Harold, this proves they know something. They wouldn't offer money unless they were trying to prevent a lawsuit. Exactly. Which means we file that lawsuit now, before they can destroy more evidence or intimidate more witnesses. We'll sue for assault, negligence, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violation of resident rights. We'll ask for punitive damages high enough to make every care facility in the state pay attention. The lawsuit was filed 3 days later. The local news picked up the story. Care facility sued after resident with dementia becomes pregnant. The headlines were shocking enough that other families started coming forward. A woman named Patricia called me directly. My mother was at Meadowbrook last year. She's 90 years old with advanced Alzheimer's. She contracted a sexually transmitted infection while she was there. The facility claimed she must have had it before admission, but she'd been tested during her medical evaluation and was clean. Now, seeing your lawsuit, I'm wondering if she was assaulted too. Another family reported their mother had unexplained bruising on her thighs and appeared traumatized whenever male staff members entered her room. Another described personality changes and regression in their grandmother after she'd been at Meadowbrook for several months. The police opened investigations into all of these cases. Detective Carmichael assembled a task force. The scope of potential abuse was staggering. 3 weeks after filing the lawsuit, we were in court for a preliminary hearing. Stanley Crawford sat with his attorneys at the defendant's table, his expression carefully neutral. Blake Sutton had been called as a witness. Harold stood to address the judge. Your Honor, we have substantial evidence that sexual assault occurred at Meadowbrook Care Facility. The plaintiff's mother, a vulnerable adult with profound deafness and severe dementia, is 8 weeks pregnant. The defendants have attempted to claim this pregnancy occurred during a 2-week home visit with family. We have video evidence that definitively disproves that claim. Stanley's attorney, a sharp-looking woman named Francine Abbott, rose to object. Your Honor, without DNA evidence identifying the father, there's no proof that our client's facility is responsible. The plaintiff's family had custody of the victim for 2 weeks during the suspected conception window. That's reasonable doubt. We have video evidence, Harold repeated firmly. Complete documentation of the alleged victim's whereabouts during her family visit. I'd like permission to present that evidence now. The judge, a stern woman named Justice Eleanor Price, nodded. Proceed. Harold set up a laptop connected to the courtroom's projection system. This is footage from a motion-activated camera placed in the guest room where Mrs. Campbell stayed during her visit to her daughter's home. The camera recorded from June 15th through June 29th, covering the entire period of her family visit. He played selected clips showing Mom sleeping alone each night, occasionally getting up to use the bathroom, always returning to bed by herself. Timestamp after timestamp, proving she was never alone with anyone during those 2 weeks. As you can see, Your Honor, Harold continued, Mrs. Campbell was appropriately supervised during her entire family visit. She was never alone with any male relatives or visitors. She slept alone every night in a room with a camera documenting her safety. The pregnancy could not have occurred during this time frame. Francine stood again. Your Honor, the defense maintains that without conclusive DNA evidence. DNA evidence is forthcoming, Harold interrupted. The court ordered Stanley Crawford to submit to DNA testing 2 weeks ago. Those results should be available shortly. In the meantime, We have proof that eliminates the family as possible suspects and focuses attention back where it belongs, on Meadowbrook Care Facility and its negligent, possibly criminal, failure to protect vulnerable residents. Justice Price reviewed her notes. I'm inclined to allow this evidence. The video documentation appears comprehensive and credible. Ms. Abbott, does your client have any evidence contradicting the plaintiff's timeline? Francine conferred with Stanley in whispered tones. Finally, she said, "Not at this time, Your Honor. But we maintain that many people had access to the victim during her time at our facility, including family members during visits, contractors, delivery personnel, all of whom would be documented in your visitor logs and security footage," Harold interjected, "which you claim were malfunctioning during the critical time frame. How convenient." The judge held up her hand. "That's enough. I want those DNA results as soon as they're available. I also want a full accounting of everyone who had access to Mrs. Campbell during her time at Meadowbrook. Visitor logs, staff schedules, contractor records, everything. This hearing is adjourned until we have more concrete evidence." 3 days after the hearing, Detective Carmichael called with news that made my stomach drop. "The IT contractor's DNA is a match. He's the father." I sat down slowly. "The contractor? I don't even know who that is." "His name is Warren Fletcher. He's 43 years old, married with 2 kids, and has been maintaining Meadowbrook's security system for the past 2 years. According to his employment records, he was on site June 20th, June 27th, July 3rd, and July 11th. All evening appointments when most visitors were gone. He had administrator access to the security system," I said, understanding dawning. "He could disable the cameras before assaulting residents." "Exactly. And we found something else. Warren Fletcher has a previous conviction for sexual assault from 15 years ago. He served 3 years in prison. And Meadowbrook hired him anyway? That's what we're investigating. Either they failed to conduct a proper background check, or they knew about his history and hired him anyway. Both scenarios open them up to massive liability." "Where is he now?" "In custody. We arrested him this morning. He initially denied everything, but when confronted with the DNA evidence, he admitted to assaulting your mother. He claimed she seemed willing and didn't resist. I felt sick. My mother is deaf and has dementia. She can't consent to anything. She probably had no idea what was happening. Which is why he's being charged with sexual assault of a vulnerable person. That's a felony with a minimum sentence of 10 years. Given his prior conviction, the prosecutor is pushing for the maximum, 25 years. The arrest made headlines. Care facility contractor arrested for sexual assault of disabled resident. News crews camped outside Meadowbrook. Families began removing their loved ones in droves. The facility's reputation was destroyed overnight. Stanley Crawford held a press conference claiming he was shocked and appalled by Warren Fletcher's actions and insisting Meadowbrook had followed all proper hiring procedures. But Detective Carmichael's investigation revealed that was a lie. Warren Fletcher's background check had shown his previous conviction clearly. Meadowbrook had hired him anyway because he offered security system maintenance at a discount rate. They'd prioritized cost savings over resident safety. Harold amended our lawsuit to include negligent hiring, conscious disregard for resident safety, and fraud for falsely advertising comprehensive security while knowingly employing a convicted sex offender with system access. The discovery process revealed even more damaging information. Warren had been on site far more frequently than his official appointment schedule showed. He'd been given a master key card that let him access resident rooms directly. Multiple residents had complained about an unfamiliar man in their rooms late at night, but staff had dismissed these complaints as dementia-related confusion. Mom's pregnancy wasn't an isolated incident. It was the inevitable result of systematic failures and intentional negligence. 4 months after filing the lawsuit, we were back in court for the main trial. Mom was visibly pregnant now, a constant reminder of the assault she couldn't remember or understand. The prosecution's case against Warren Fletcher was straightforward. DNA evidence proved he'd fathered Mom's child. His access records showed he was at Meadowbrook during the conception window. His previous conviction established a pattern of predatory behavior, but he tried to defend himself anyway. claiming Mom had somehow consented despite being deaf and unable to communicate verbally, despite having dementia so severe she often didn't recognize her own daughters. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes before returning a guilty verdict. Warren Fletcher was sentenced to 25 years in prison. He'd be 70 before he was eligible for parole. Our civil case against Meadowbrook was more complex. We had to prove not just that assault occurred, but that the facility's negligence made it possible. Harold called me as the first witness. I testified about Mom's condition, her vulnerability, my decision to place her at Meadowbrook based on their advertised security features. Did the facility deliver on those advertised protections? Harold asked. No. They hired a convicted sex offender and gave him unrestricted access to vulnerable residents. They ignored complaints, they disabled security cameras, they did everything wrong. Francine cross-examined me aggressively. Isn't it true that you only visited your mother twice a week? That you couldn't know what happened during the times you weren't there? I visited 3 times a week, actually, and I trusted Meadowbrook to protect her during the times I couldn't be there. That's what I paid them for. That's what they promised to do. Isn't it also true that you took your mother out of the facility for 2 full weeks, removing her from professional supervision? I took her to visit family. She was supervised constantly by people who love her. Unlike Meadowbrook, we didn't give convicted predators access to her bedroom. Harold's next witness was Detective Carmichael, who testified about the investigation's findings. The disabled security cameras. Warren Fletcher's previous conviction. The multiple resident complaints that were dismissed. In your professional opinion, Harold asked, could this assault have been prevented? Absolutely. A proper background check would have flagged Mr. Fletcher's conviction. Basic security protocols would have prevented him from having unsupervised access to resident rooms. And if the security cameras had been functioning as advertised, the assault would have been documented, and Mr. Fletcher could have been stopped before victimizing anyone else. How many other potential victims did your investigation identify? Detective Carmichael consulted her notes. We identified 6 other female residents who had concerning interactions with Mr. Fletcher. 2 contracted sexually transmitted infections during their time at Meadowbrook. 3 showed signs of trauma when examined. 1 became pregnant but miscarried before the pregnancy was discovered. The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Judge Price had to call for order. Francine tried to discredit the detective's testimony. But you can't prove those other incidents were caused by my client's employee, can you? Sexually transmitted infections can have multiple sources. Trauma in dementia patients is common. Miscarriages happen naturally. The DNA evidence proves Mr. Fletcher assaulted at least 1 resident, Detective Carmichael replied calmly. The pattern of his access, combined with the disabled security cameras and ignored complaints, strongly suggests he assaulted others as well. Whether we can prove each individual case doesn't change Meadowbrook's fundamental failure to protect vulnerable people. Harold then called several former Meadowbrook employees who testified about the facility's culture of neglect and cost-cutting. Paula York, the night nurse who'd worked with Blake Sutton, testified that she'd reported Warren Fletcher's presence in resident rooms to her supervisor multiple times. He'd be there at 10 or 11 at night, claiming he was checking camera angles or adjusting equipment. But he'd be in residents' rooms, not in the hallways where the cameras were mounted. It didn't make sense. What did your supervisor say when you reported this? Harold asked. She told me Warren was a contractor and had permission to be there. She said I should focus on my nursing duties and stop questioning management decisions. Another former employee, a care aide named Sylvia Cross, described being written up for insubordination when she questioned why security cameras were frequently offline. I asked Stanley Crawford directly why the cameras weren't working. He told me they were being upgraded, and I should stop asking questions that weren't my concern. A week later, I was written up for creating a hostile work environment. The message was clear. Keep quiet, or lose your job. Harold displayed emails showing Stanley had been informed about Warren's background and the security camera issues multiple times. Rather than address these concerns, he'd threatened employees who raised them. Mr. Crawford knew he'd hired a sex offender. He knew the security systems weren't working properly. He knew residents were complaining about unauthorized people in their rooms. And he did nothing because fixing these problems would cost money. He chose profit over protection. When Harold finished presenting evidence, he played one final video for the jury. "This is the complete recording from Mrs. Campbell's stay at her daughter's home," Harold explained, fast-forwarding through 2 weeks of footage. Every night, every hour, documented proof that she was safe, supervised, and never alone with anyone who could have harmed her. He paused the video on a frame showing Mom sleeping peacefully, timestamp clearly visible. "The defense wants you to believe the assault happened here, during this family visit. The evidence proves that's impossible." Then Harold pulled up a different video. This is from July 3rd, obtained from a traffic camera near Meadowbrook. It shows Warren Fletcher's vehicle entering the facility parking lot at 9:47 p.m. and leaving at 11:23 p.m., 96 minutes. Another video. This is from the apartment building across from Meadowbrook. A resident there had a security camera facing the street. It captured Warren Fletcher entering Meadowbrook's side entrance, the one contractors use, at 10:02 p.m. on July 11th. More footage. More timestamps. A pattern of Warren Fletcher visiting Meadowbrook late at night, staying for extended periods, accessing the building through side entrances, while security cameras mysteriously weren't recording. "We couldn't get footage from inside Meadowbrook because those cameras were conveniently disabled," Harold said. "But we got footage from everywhere else. Traffic cameras, neighboring businesses, apartment buildings. We tracked Mr. Fletcher's movements. We documented his access. We proved he was there when he claimed he wasn't. And finally," Harold said, "we have this." He played audio from a phone call Detective Carmichael had recorded during her investigation. Warren Fletcher's voice, caught in a moment of unguarded honesty. "Stanley knew I had access to the rooms. He knew I was there after hours. He never asked questions because I kept his costs down." The defense called Stanley Crawford to the stand. He testified that he'd trusted Warren Fletcher, that he'd believed the background check was accurate, that he'd had no idea about the assaults. Harold's cross-examination was devastating. "Mr. Crawford, you advertised comprehensive 24/7 security monitoring, correct?" "Yes." "But the security cameras in resident areas were disabled on multiple occasions during Mr. Fletcher's employment, correct?" "There were some technical issues." "Technical issues that only occurred during night shifts? Technical issues that required administrator-level access to create? Those kinds of technical issues?" Stanley's face reddened. "I don't know the technical details of how the system works. But you do know that multiple employees reported concerns about Mr. Fletcher's presence in resident rooms, correct? We have emails proving you were informed. Employees raise many concerns. I can't investigate every single one. Even when those concerns involve a contractor accessing vulnerable residents' rooms late at night. Even when those concerns involve disabled security cameras that you advertised as a key safety feature. Even when those concerns come from multiple employees over several months. I addressed the concerns I felt were credible. By threatening employees who raised them, by writing up staff members who questioned your decisions, by ignoring documented evidence that something was wrong." Stanley had no good answers. His testimony made clear that he'd prioritized cost savings and avoiding problems over resident safety. The jury deliberated for 3 hours before returning a verdict. Meadowbrook Care Facility was liable for negligent hiring, negligent supervision, and intentional misrepresentation. They awarded us $2.3 million in compensatory damages and an additional $5 million in punitive damages. The verdict made national news. Care Facility ordered to pay $7.3 million after deaf woman with dementia assaulted by contractor. Other facilities rushed to review their own security protocols and background check procedures. Meadowbrook closed 3 months after the verdict. They couldn't survive the reputational damage, the mass exodus of residents, and the financial judgment. Stanley Crawford filed for bankruptcy and disappeared from the elder care industry entirely. Warren Fletcher's criminal appeals were denied. He would serve his full sentence. But for me, the victory felt hollow. Mom was still pregnant with her attacker's child. She still couldn't understand what had happened to her. She still had dementia that would only get worse. Rachel and I discussed the pregnancy with Mom's doctors. Given her age and health conditions, carrying to term posed serious risks. But termination also carried risks for someone in her condition. What would Mom want? Rachel asked me during one of our countless difficult conversations. I don't know. She can't tell us, and even if we asked her, she wouldn't understand the question. We ultimately decided to let Mom make the choice as much as she could. When her doctors explained in simple terms that she was having a baby, Mom seemed pleased. She'd always loved children. Baby, she signed, smiling. My baby. She didn't understand how it happened. She didn't remember Warren Fletcher. She just knew a baby was coming, and in her confused state, that made her happy. So we supported her through the pregnancy. Rachel and I attended every doctor's appointment. We made sure Mom received excellent prenatal care. We prepared for the birth and the difficult decisions that would follow. Mom gave birth to a healthy baby girl in late February. The delivery was complicated by Mom's age and health issues, but both mother and daughter survived. Holding that tiny infant, I felt a complicated swirl of emotions. Love, because she was innocent and beautiful. Anger, because she represented the worst violation imaginable. Grief, because Mom would never be able to care for her properly. What should we name her? Rachel asked, looking down at the sleeping baby. We'd discussed this. Mom couldn't make that decision in her current state. The responsibility fell to us. Hope, I said finally. Her name is Hope, because despite everything terrible that led to her existence, she deserves a chance at a beautiful life. Rachel and I applied for guardianship of Hope. Given Mom's condition and the circumstances of the conception, the court agreed. Hope became legally our responsibility, with Rachel taking primary custody since she had more space and experience with children. Mom loved seeing Hope during visits, though she rarely remembered from one day to the next that the baby was hers. Sometimes she thought Hope was me as an infant. Sometimes she thought Hope was Rachel. Sometimes she just enjoyed holding a baby without understanding the connection. The settlement money went into a trust for Mom's continued care and Hope's future. We moved Mom to a small, highly vetted care facility with exceptional security and resident protection protocols. We visited daily. We never again took for granted that any institution would keep her safe. Warren Fletcher tried to claim parental rights to Hope from prison. His petition was denied immediately. He had no rights to the child conceived through assault of a vulnerable person. 5 years after the assault, Hope started kindergarten. She was a bright, happy child who loved books and music and drawing. She knew she had two mothers, Rachel, who raised her day to day, and Olivia, who visited constantly and showered her with affection. She also knew she had a grandmother with a special brain, who lived in a care home and needed extra help with everything. Hope learned basic sign language to communicate with Mom during visits, even though Mom's dementia made consistent communication nearly impossible. Why doesn't Grandma remember me? Hope asked one day after a visit where Mom had been particularly confused. Her brain is sick, I explained gently. It makes remembering hard. But even when she can't remember your name or who you are, she loves you. You can see it in her smile when you visit. Will she get better? No, sweetie. She'll probably get worse, but we'll keep loving her and taking care of her no matter what. Mom's dementia progressed as expected. By the time Hope was 7, Mom rarely had lucid moments anymore. She lived in her own confusing reality, sometimes frightened, sometimes content, always beyond our reach. But she'd given us something invaluable through her suffering. The lawsuit and subsequent publicity had led to sweeping reforms in care facility oversight. Background checks became more rigorous. Security requirements became mandatory. Resident rights protections became enforceable, with real penalties. Meadowbrook's closure sent a message to the entire industry. Neglecting vulnerable people would have consequences, real, devastating consequences. Other victims came forward. Other families filed lawsuits. Other predators were exposed and prosecuted. The changes didn't happen overnight, but they happened. When Mom finally passed away peacefully at age 61, Hope was 9 years old. She stood between Rachel and me at the funeral, holding both our hands, A living symbol of tragedy transformed, not erased, never erased, but transformed into something worth protecting. The video evidence that had proven Mom's innocence during her family visit now served a different purpose. It reminded us that documentation matters, that evidence matters, that speaking up matters. Warren Fletcher would spend decades in prison. Stanley Crawford's career was destroyed, Meadowbrook was gone, and thousands of vulnerable people across the country were safer because one deaf woman with dementia had gotten pregnant and her daughters had refused to accept the lies told to cover it up. That was Mom's legacy, not the assault, not the tragedy, but the truth that followed, the accountability that came from refusing to be silenced. As I watched Hope grow into a strong, compassionate young person who volunteered at elder care facilities and advocated for disability rights, I understood that some stories don't have happy endings, they have meaningful ones. And sometimes that's enough.